The galaxy had learned many things about humans since first contact, but understanding them was another matter entirely. Ambassador Kelthris of the Valerian Council stood in the observation deck of Training Station Epsilon 7, his crystalline fingers tapping nervously against the transparent aluminum viewing port. Below, in the massive combat arena, 43 of the galaxy's finest military academy cadets prepared for their annual interspecies tactical assessment. The station itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, built by 12 different species to serve as neutral ground for training the next generation of peacekeepers and defenders. Its corridors hummed with the sounds of 100 different languages, and its mess halls served food that ranged from liquid methane soups to crystallized mineral compounds. Kelthris watched as the cadets assembled. There were Coraxians, their six-limbed bodies covered in sleek, chitinous armor that gleamed under the artificial lights. The 3 Valerians present moved with fluid grace, their translucent bodies shifting through subtle color changes that indicated their emotional states. A pair of Thendorian twins stood near the center, their massive frames covered in thick fur that protected them from temperatures that would freeze most other species solid. Then there were the Zilari, small and quick, their large eyes perfectly adapted for seeing in multiple spectrums simultaneously. They darted between the larger species with practiced ease, already forming tactical groups and discussing strategy in their high-pitched, rapid-fire language. What made this year different stood at the far end of the arena. Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps leaned casually against the wall, arms crossed, watching the organized chaos with an expression that Kelthris had learned to recognize as amusement. She was the first human to be assigned as an observer to the training exercises, part of the ongoing cultural exchange program that Earth had insisted upon when joining the galactic community 2 years prior. Humans were still an enigma. They came from a death world, a planet so hostile that most species required environmental suits just to visit its surface. Earth had weather that could kill, animals that hunted in packs, diseases that evolved faster than medical science could counter them, and geological activity that could wipe out entire cities without warning. Yet humans thrived there. More than thrived, they had become the dominant species, and then reached for the stars. The galactic community had welcomed them cautiously. Humans were classified as a Class 7 persistence hunter species, a category that made many of the herbivorous and prey species delegates deeply uncomfortable. They had forward-facing eyes, sharp teeth designed for tearing meat, and an unsettling ability to track and pursue targets over impossible distances and timeframes. But they were also surprisingly gentle. They kept small, predatory animals in their homes as companions. They formed emotional bonds with creatures from other worlds. They cried at sad stories and laughed at absurd situations. They were a walking contradiction, and the galaxy was still trying to figure them out. Kelthris turned his attention back to the arena as the announcement system crackled to life. The voice of Commandant Brelis, a stern Coraxian with 3 decades of military experience, echoed through the space. Attention all cadets. Today's exercise will test your combat readiness, tactical thinking, and ability to work under pressure. You will face an opponent that has bested every class for the past 5 years. You will have access to training weapons, basic shields, and your standard equipment. The exercise will continue until all cadets have been eliminated or the opponent is contained. Begin in 3 minutes. A murmur ran through the assembled cadets. 5 years undefeated was an impressive record. Several of them began checking their equipment more carefully, while others huddled together to discuss strategy. Sarah pushed off from the wall and walked to the center of the arena. Every eye tracked her movement. She stopped in the middle of the marked combat zone and pressed a button on her wrist communicator. "Bring them in," she said simply. The far wall of the arena split open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. For a moment, nothing happened. The cadets tensed. Weapons raised. Shields activated. Some of the smaller species moved behind their larger companions. The Coraxians spread out, using their superior numbers to cover multiple approach angles. Then came the sound. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the floor itself. It was followed by another, higher-pitched but no less intimidating. Then a third. A fourth. A fifth. The growls merged into a symphony of predatory threat that triggered instinctive fear responses in 3/4 of the species present. 2 Zilari cadets actually fled, their prey instincts overriding their training. No one blamed them. That sound was the same frequency that predators across 1,000 worlds used to announce their dominance, their hunger, their intent to hunt. From the darkness emerged the source of that sound. Not one opponent, but 6. They moved on 4 legs, their bodies low to the ground, muscles rippling under golden-brown fur marked with darker stripes and spots. Their eyes caught the arena lights and reflected them back in an eerie green glow. Their ears were pointed and alert, swiveling to catch every sound. Their tails lashed behind them with barely contained energy. They were beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Each one was roughly the size of a Valerian adult, weighing perhaps 80 pounds, with paws that seemed too large for their bodies and faces that combined feline features with something far more primal. "What are those?" whispered one of the Thendorians, his voice barely audible over the growling. Sarah smiled, and there was genuine affection in her expression. "Meet the cubs. These are juvenile specimens of Panthera leo, commonly called lions. They're 6 months old, born here on the station as part of Earth's genetic preservation program. They've been trained for these exercises since they were 8 weeks old." The cubs spread out, moving with a coordination that spoke of pack intelligence. They didn't rush forward. They watched. They waited. They assessed. One of the Coraxian cadets, braver or more foolish than the rest, activated his shock lance and charged forward. The nearest cub, slightly larger than the others, with a faint mane beginning to show around his neck, didn't retreat. Instead, he crouched lower, muscles coiling like springs. The Coraxian thrust with his lance. The cub moved faster than should have been possible, twisting aside with liquid grace. The lance passed harmlessly through the space where he had been. Before the cadet could recover, the cub pounced. 80 pounds of young predator hit the Coraxian like a guided missile, bearing him backward. The impact triggered the cadet's elimination sensors, and a red light began flashing on his armor. "Eliminated," announced the computer system. "Cadet Vorix, please, exit the arena." The Coraxian struggled to rise, but the cub simply sat on his chest, looking immensely pleased with himself. His tail swished back and forth, and he made a sound that was halfway between a growl and a purr. That seemed to break the spell. The remaining cadets surged forward, trying to overwhelm the cubs through superior numbers. It was exactly the wrong strategy. The cubs moved like they were sharing a single mind. They split up, dodging between the larger opponents, using speed and agility where strength would fail. One cub would distract from the front, while another flanked. They leaped impossible heights, using equipment and other cadets as springboards. They slid under shields and darted through openings that seemed too small for them to fit through. A Zilari cadet tried to use her superior speed to dart in and tag one of the smaller female cubs. The cub simply waited until the last possible moment, then swatted with one oversized paw. The padded blow was enough to trigger the elimination sensor and send the tiny Zilari tumbling across the arena floor. 2 of the Thendorians tried to corner one of the cubs against the wall. The young lion looked left, looked right, then looked up. In a move that defied what prey species considered possible, he ran up the wall, using his momentum and claws to climb 5 feet of vertical surface before launching himself backward over the surprised cadets. He landed on one's back, rode him like a surfboard for 3 steps, then bounced off to eliminate the other with a flying tackle that would have made any Earth football player proud. The battle lasted 17 minutes. One by one, the cadets were eliminated. Some went down fighting bravely, managing to force the cubs to work for their victory. Others were picked off quickly, their species' instincts betraying them at crucial moments. The cubs were relentless, coordinated, and despite their young age, utterly dominant. Finally, only one cadet remained. A Valerian named Silthos, who had been smart enough to stay on the defensive, using obstacles and careful positioning to avoid being isolated. He was good, Kelthris admitted, but he was also alone. And the 6 cubs knew it. They circled him, taking their time now. There was no rush. They had learned patience from their human handlers. And they demonstrated it now. Silthos tried to break through the circle 3 times. But each time one of the cubs was there to turn him back. Finally, the largest cub, the one with the developing mane, made his move. He didn't attack directly. Instead, he started walking toward Silthos, slowly and deliberately. The Valerian raised his shock lance defensively, but the cub kept coming. There was something hypnotic about that slow, confident advance. When he was 5 feet away, the cub suddenly roared. It wasn't the full, earth-shaking roar of an adult lion, but it was impressive nonetheless. The sound filled the arena. Primal and powerful, Silthos's color flickered through panicked yellows and oranges. His training told him to stand firm. But millions of years of evolution screamed at him to run. Evolution won. He broke and ran. 2 of the cubs were waiting. They took him down gently, careful not to actually hurt him, and his elimination light flashed red. The arena fell silent except for the heavy breathing of exhausted cadets and the satisfied panting of 6 very pleased young predators. Sarah walked into the middle of the arena, and immediately all 6 cubs converged on her. The transformation was instant and complete. The terrifying hunters who had just demolished 43 trained military cadets became bouncing, wiggling, enthusiastic babies. They rubbed against her legs, climbed over each other to get closer, and made sounds that were pure affection. She laughed and sat down cross-legged on the arena floor. The cubs immediately piled onto and around her, a mass of fur and paws and purring growls. The largest one, the leader, claimed her lap as his throne and looked out at the defeated cadets with an expression that could only be described as smug. From the observation deck, Kelthries watched with his mouth hanging open in shock. Around him, other observers were having similar reactions. The Thendorian observer was making religious gestures. The Zilari representative had fainted. "How?" Kelthris whispered. "How does she do that?" Commander Brelis, standing beside him, made a clicking sound that indicated deep thought. "Humans," she said, "are persistence hunters, yes, but they are also social pack animals. They bond, they nurture, they adopt creatures from other species and treat them as family. Those cubs down there? They don't see her as prey or competition. They see her as their pack, their pride, their family. But they're predators," Kelthris protested. "They're dangerous. So are humans," Brelis replied. "Perhaps that's why they understand each other so well." The station's recreation center was unlike anything most species had seen before humans joined the galactic community. The Terran contingent had insisted on including something they called a common lounge, a space designed not for efficiency or function, but for what humans termed hanging out. It had soft seating in various sizes to accommodate different species, entertainment screens, game tables, and most controversially, an area where humans brought their animals. Cadet Marcus Webb sat in one of the larger chairs, his tall frame relaxed in a way that still made some species nervous. Humans at rest looked too much like predators waiting to strike, even though they were perfectly peaceful. Around him sat a dozen cadets from the morning's exercise, still processing their thorough defeat. The 6 lion cubs were sprawled across every available surface. 2 of them had claimed Marcus's lap and were engaged in what humans called grooming each other, which mostly seemed to involve biting each other's ears and batting at each other's faces. Another lay stretched across the back of the couch like a particularly large, striped house cat. The remaining 3 were wrestling in the open space, a tangle of paws and tails and mock-fierce growling. Vorix, the first Coraxian to be eliminated, sat as far from the cubs as possible while still remaining in the conversation circle. His compound eyes kept tracking every movement the young predators made. "They almost killed me," he said for the 3rd time. "That one just appeared out of nowhere." Marcus reached over and scratched behind the ears of the largest cub, the one humans had named Apollo for reasons related to their ancient mythology. Apollo's eyes closed in bliss, and he started making a sound like a small earthquake. "They were playing," Marcus explained patiently. "If they wanted to hurt you, you'd know. These guys can take down prey 3 times their size back on Earth, and they're only 6 months old." An adult lion can break bones with a swat. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably. Silthos, the Valerian who had lasted longest in the arena, changed color to a thoughtful purple. But they listened to Lieutenant Chen. How is that possible? They're apex predators. Why would they submit to commands? Because she raised them from cubs, said a new voice. Everyone turned to see Sarah Chen entering the lounge, carrying what appeared to be several large containers of food. The cubs immediately perked up, their attention laser-focused on her. Even Apollo, who had seemed half asleep in Marcus's lap, was suddenly alert. She set down the containers and started pulling out massive slabs of raw meat. The cubs lined up without being told, sitting in a neat row like students waiting for lunch. Sarah placed a portion in front of each one, making sure the smaller females got pieces sized appropriately for them. Only after she patted the last cub did they begin eating, tearing into their meals with enthusiasm that made several herbivorous cadets look away. On Earth, Sarah continued, walking over to join the group while the cubs were distracted by food. Lions live in family groups called prides. The females do most of the hunting, working together to take down prey much larger than themselves. The males protect the territory and the pride itself. They're social, intelligent, and they understand hierarchy. She settled into a chair, and immediately two of the cubs who had finished eating first came over, draping themselves across her feet. These 6 were born here on the station. Their mother was part of our genetic preservation program. She died from complications after birth, so we hand-raised them. From the moment they opened their eyes, they saw humans. We fed them, played with them, taught them. We became their pride. A Silari cadet, named Pipix, who had been brave enough to return after fleeing the arena, spoke up in her high-pitched voice. But don't predators see smaller creatures as food? I have seen the videos from Earth. Lions hunt animals that look like my species. Her fur was standing up slightly. A sign of nervousness. Marcus gestured to one of the cubs near him, a female with a particularly pretty face that humans had named Nala. Hey girl, come here. The cub immediately bounded over, and Marcus gently took one of her massive paws in his hand. See these? He pressed gently, and curved claws extended from the paw. They were razor-sharp, designed by millions of years of evolution to grip struggling prey. Pipix squeaked and pressed herself further into her chair. Marcus smiled reassuringly. These could slice through your suit like tissue paper. One bite could crush your skull. She weighs as much as you do, but she's pure muscle and predatory instinct. He paused, then leaned down and kissed the top of Nala's head. The cub purred and rubbed her face against his. But she won't hurt you because we've taught her not to, because she trusts us, and we've taught her to trust our judgment about who is friend and who is food. Vorix clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. This is what makes humans so unsettling to the rest of the galaxy. You take something that should be your competition, your threat, and you make it family. The Coraxian Empire conquered 17 worlds before joining the galactic community, and we never considered befriending the predators on any of them. We eliminated them or avoided them. That's because you see the universe as a competition, Sarah said, but there was no judgment in her tone. Humans learned a long time ago that cooperation beats competition in the long run. We domesticated wolves into dogs 30,000 years ago. We made partners out of horses, cats, even birds of prey. We learned that the best way to survive wasn't to dominate everything around us, but to build relationships with it. One of the Thendorian twins, who had been silent until now, spoke up. His name was Gronthar, and his species came from a frozen world where trust between individuals could mean the difference between survival and death. But how do you know they won't turn on you? Predators are unpredictable. Apollo, having finished his meal, chose that moment to lumber over to Sarah. Despite his young age, he already weighed nearly 90 pounds. And when he decided he wanted to be in her lap, he simply climbed up, shoving the smaller cubs aside. Sarah grunted at the weight but accommodated him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders while he settled in, his back legs hanging comically off her lap. We know they might, she admitted, her fingers working through Apollo's fur to find the spot behind his ear that made his back leg twitch. Every creature is unpredictable to some degree. Even humans can't fully predict what other humans will do, and we're the same species. But we've raised these cubs with clear boundaries, consistent training, and most importantly, love and respect. Love? Silthos's colors shifted to confused amber. You love them? They're animals. They're sentient beings. Marcus corrected firmly. They think. They feel. They remember. They have personalities. Apollo here is brave and confident. A natural leader. Nala is smart and cautious. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Simba, he pointed to one of the wrestling cubs, is playful and sometimes reckless. They're individuals. And yes, we love them. Pipix had been watching the cubs with growing fascination, her fear slowly being replaced by curiosity. Can I? She hesitated, her large eyes darting between the humans and the nearest cub. A female named Sarabi, who was grooming herself with the focused intensity that cats everywhere seem to display. Can I touch one? Sarah smiled. Of course, but let's do it right. Come here, kneel down at about my height. She patted the floor next to her chair. Pipix approached nervously, her small body tense and ready to flee. The other cadets watched with intense interest. Sarabi, Sarah called softly. The cub looked up from her grooming, her green eyes fixing on Sarah. Come, say hello, baby girl. The cub stood and stretched, her small body extending into a graceful curve that showcased the powerful muscles beneath her fur. Then she padded over, moving with the fluid grace that made lions such efficient hunters. Pipix started to tremble. Breathe, Sarah instructed gently. She can smell fear, but she won't attack because of it. She's curious about you. Hold out your hand. Palm down. Let her sniff you. Pipix extended one tiny paw hand, shaking slightly. Sarabi approached and sniffed carefully, her wet nose twitching as she processed the Solari's scent. Then, apparently satisfied that this small creature was not food, she did something that made Pipix squeak in surprise. She rubbed her head against Pipix's hand, marking the Solari with her scent. She likes you, Marcus said, grinning. That's how cats claim their people. You're part of her pride now. Emboldened, Pipix reached out with both hands and carefully stroked Sarabi's fur. The cub's purr kicked up several notches, and she leaned into the touch. Other cadets began edging closer, curiosity overcoming caution. For the next hour, the recreation center became an impromptu lesson in human-animal relations. The cadets took turns interacting with the cubs under careful supervision. They learned that the small sounds the cubs made meant different things: contentment, play invitation, warning. They discovered that despite being predators, the cubs were surprisingly gentle when they wanted to be. Gronthar found himself with 2 cubs wrestling in his lap, their mock battle completely ignoring his presence as they rolled and tumbled over his legs. He laughed, a deep rumbling sound that made his whole body shake, which only encouraged the cubs to play harder. Voryx, after much encouragement, allowed Apollo to sniff his chitinous armor. The big cub seemed fascinated by the different texture, pawing at it experimentally. When Voryx cautiously reached out and touched the cub's mane, Apollo closed his eyes and leaned into the touch just as he did with humans. This is incredible, Voryx admitted. I fought him this morning. He defeated me in seconds. Now he's purring while I pet him. Context matters, Sarah explained. In the arena, you were an opponent in a training exercise. Here, you're a potential friend. Cubs are adaptable. They learn quickly who to trust and who to be wary of. Right now, you're in their territory, you're calm, and we've told them you're safe. So to them, you are. Silthos had been observing everything with intense focus. His species was known for their analytical minds, and he had been processing what he was seeing. Lieutenant Chen, may I ask something that might be considered rude? Go ahead, she encouraged. Your species conquered your entire planet. You developed weapons that could destroy all life on your world. You have aggression in your nature that most of the galaxy finds frightening. Yet you spend your time raising animals that other species would classify as dangerous threats. Why? Sarah was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Apollo's mane while she considered her answer. Because humans understand something that I think the galaxy is still learning. Strength isn't about domination. Real strength is knowing you have the power to destroy something and choosing to protect it instead. She gestured to the cubs. We could have let these cubs grow up wild, or used them purely as weapons, or kept them caged for study. Instead, we chose to raise them with love, to let them be who they are, while teaching them to coexist with us. Yes, they're powerful. Yes, they're dangerous if they want to be. But they're also beautiful, intelligent, and capable of affection. Marcus nodded in agreement. Earth taught us that everything has value. Every species, every creature plays a role in the ecosystem. Predators keep prey populations healthy. They eliminate the weak and sick, preventing disease spread. Without lions, the grasslands of Africa would be overrun with herbivores that would eat all the vegetation, turning paradise into desert. But more than that, Sarah continued, they teach us about ourselves. When you raise a predator, you have to be calm, consistent, confident. You can't show weakness or uncertainty because they'll sense it immediately. You have to earn their respect every single day. It makes you better, stronger, more self-aware. One of the younger cadets, a Valerian barely past adolescence, spoke up. Do all humans have this ability? To bond with predators? Not all, Marcus admitted. Some humans are afraid of animals, or just not interested in them. But millions of us share our homes with creatures that could hurt us if they chose to. Dogs, cats, even reptiles and birds of prey. We've even made friends with species from other worlds since joining the galactic community. As if to emphasize the point, Simba, who had been wrestling with his brother, suddenly abandoned the game and made a beeline for Pippix. Before the little Zilari could react, the cub had flopped down next to her and rolled onto his back, exposing his belly in a clear invitation for pets. He wants you to rub his stomach, Sarah said, smiling at Pippix's confused expression. It's a sign of trust. Belly up is a vulnerable position for a predator. He's showing you he trusts you not to hurt him. Pippix tentatively reached out and stroked the soft fur of Simba's belly. The cub's purr could be heard across the room. Around them, other cadets were having their own moments of connection with the cubs. Fear was transforming into wonder, and wonder into something that looked suspiciously like affection. The galactic community was learning what humans had known for millennia. The line between predator and friend was thinner than anyone expected, and crossing it required nothing more than understanding, patience, and an open heart. 3 weeks after the training exercise, Training Station Epsilon 7 received an unexpected emergency transmission. A research vessel studying a nearby nebula had suffered catastrophic systems failure and was drifting without power. The ship carried a crew of 7 scientists from 5 different species, and their life support was failing. The station's rescue teams mobilized immediately, but there was a problem. The research vessel had been investigating an area of space known for dangerous radiation emissions and unstable gravitational fields. Any rescue attempt would be complicated and risky. Ambassador Kelthries found himself once again in an observation room, but this time, the view wasn't of a training arena. Instead, holographic displays showed the crippled research vessel tumbling slowly through space, its hull already showing signs of structural damage. Commander Brellis stood at the main console, coordinating the rescue effort with the efficiency that had made her legendary. Around her, officers from multiple species worked in controlled chaos, running calculations and preparing equipment. The main complication, Brellis was explaining to the assembled observers, is that we need to send a team through a damaged airlock in Section 3. The rest of the ship is too unstable, but that section suffered decompression, and we don't know what condition it's in. The team will need to navigate through potentially collapsed corridors in zero gravity, while the ship's rotation creates shifting gravitational vectors. What about using drones? Asked one of the observers, a Zilari military attaché. The radiation interferes with remote controls, Brellis replied. We need eyes on site, making real-time decisions. We need our best people. The door to the observation room opened, and Sarah Chen entered, followed by Marcus Webb and Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, another human officer who specialized in zero-gravity operations. Behind them, on leashes that seemed both absurd and necessary, walked all 6 lion cubs. The room fell silent. Kelthris felt his crystalline body structure resonate with confusion. "Commander," he said carefully, "surely you're not suggesting—" "And I'm not suggesting anything," Brelis replied, her mandibles clicking in what humans had learned to recognize as determination. "Lieutenant Chen volunteered her team, and I accepted. They have skills that no other team on this station possesses." Sarah stepped forward, and the cubs moved with her in perfect synchronization. In the 3 weeks since the training exercise, they had grown noticeably. Apollo now weighed close to 110 pounds, his mane filling in to give him a truly impressive appearance. The others had similarly developed, their bodies hardening into the powerful predatory machines that nature had designed. "With respect, Commander," Kelthris protested, "how can animals possibly help with a rescue operation in space?" Yuki Tanaka spoke up, her voice calm and professional. "Ambassador, these aren't just animals. They've been training for exactly this kind of scenario for months. Let me show you." She activated a holographic playback, and images filled the center of the room. It showed the cubs, slightly younger, moving through a mock-up of a damaged spacecraft. They navigated through tight spaces that humans struggled with, their flexible bodies allowing them to squeeze through gaps and twist around obstacles. They worked as a coordinated unit, one cub scouting ahead, while others secured a path. Most impressively, they wore specially designed suits that protected them from vacuum while allowing their natural mobility. "Cats," Marcus explained, "have extraordinary balance and spatial awareness. They can orient themselves in 3-dimensional space better than most species. In zero gravity, that ability is amplified. Plus, their size allows them to access areas we can't reach. We've trained them to locate people, to stay calm in emergency situations, and to follow complex commands, even in chaotic environments." "But they're predators," another observer objected. "What if they panic and attack the people they're supposed to rescue?" Sarah knelt down, and immediately all 6 cubs gathered around her. She looked up at the observers with an expression that was both gentle and absolutely confident. "These cubs have been in my care since they were 2 days old. I trust them with my life. More importantly, I trust them with other people's lives. They know the difference between a training exercise and real danger. They know when to be fierce and when to be gentle." Apollo pushed his head under her hand, demanding attention. She scratched his ears absently while continuing. "The crew of that ship is dying. We have maybe 6 hours before their life support fails completely. A conventional rescue team would take 8 hours to navigate the damage and locate all 7 crew members. My team can do it in 4. Brelis made her decision with the swift certainty that had earned her command. "You're authorized. Take your team and bring those people home." 2 hours later, the rescue shuttle detached from training station Epsilon 7. Inside, the human team made final preparations, while the cubs waited with impressive patience. They wore specially designed suits that looked like miniature spacesuits, with clear helmets that allowed full visibility and life support systems scaled to their size. The damaged research vessel loomed larger as they approached. Its hull was scarred with impact damage, and several sections were clearly exposed to vacuum. The ship's rotation was slow but dangerous, creating a constantly shifting gravitational environment. "Sealing helmets," Sarah commanded. The cubs sat still while their handlers secured the final connections on their suits. Through the clear faceplates, their green eyes watched everything with alert intelligence. The shuttle docked with the damaged airlock, and Marcus worked quickly to override the damaged controls. The inner door opened with a screech of tortured metal, revealing a corridor that had clearly seen violence. Equipment had been torn loose and floated in the zero gravity. Some surfaces showed scoring from electrical fires. "Stay close," Sarah told the cubs. Her voice transmitted through their suit communicators. She released their tethers, and immediately they spread out in a formation they had practiced hundreds of times. 2 scouts moved forward, their enhanced night vision and multiple senses analyzing the environment. The others maintained position, ready to support or retreat as needed. The team moved deeper into the ship, navigating through sections that alternated between zero gravity and weak, rotating gravity fields. The cubs adapted instantly, using their claws to grip surfaces in zero gravity and their superior balance to handle the shifting gravitational vectors. Where humans had to carefully pull themselves along guide ropes, the cubs simply bounded from surface to surface with effortless grace. "First life sign," Yuki announced, checking her scanner. 20 meters ahead, behind a collapsed bulkhead, they found the first crew member, a Valerian scientist who had been trapped when a support beam collapsed across the doorway she had been trying to escape through. She was unconscious but alive, her suit's life support nearly depleted. The opening was too small for the humans to reach through, and cutting the beam would take precious time they didn't have. Sarah looked at Nala, the smallest and most agile of the female cubs. "Nala, retrieve." The cub moved forward without hesitation, her small body easily sliding through the gap. She reached the unconscious Valerian and carefully gripped the scientist's suit in her jaws, exactly as she had been trained. Then, moving backwards with the sure-footed confidence that came from countless practice sessions, she pulled the Valerian through the gap. Marcus immediately began emergency medical treatment, while Sarah and the cubs moved on to locate the next survivor. The rescue became a race against time and physics. The ship's structural integrity was degrading by the minute, and its erratic rotation was getting worse. The team found the second crew member, a Coraxian, floating in a completely dark section of the ship. Apollo located him using senses that went beyond vision, then stayed with the injured crew member while Sarah navigated through the darkness to reach them. The third and fourth crew members were together, trapped in a section that had sealed automatically during the decompression. The door controls were dead, and the manual override was jammed. The cubs worked as a team, 3 of them bracing against nearby surfaces while Simba used his powerful jaws and claws to help Marcus pry open the emergency access panel. It took 20 minutes of coordinated effort, but they got the door open. The 5th crew member presented the biggest challenge. She was a Thendorian, which meant she weighed nearly 400 pounds, and she was trapped in a section of the ship that was experiencing the strongest rotational gravity. The pathway to reach her required navigating through a section where debris was literally orbiting in a circular pattern, creating a deadly obstacle course. The cubs went first, their smaller size and incredible reflexes allowing them to dodge between pieces of spinning metal and plastic. They secured lines that the humans used to pull themselves through, with the cubs stationed at intervals to stabilize the ropes and help guide their human pack through the danger. When they reached the Thendorian, she was semi-conscious and delirious from lack of oxygen. Apollo positioned himself next to her massive head, and his presence seemed to calm her, even in her confused state. There was something about the young predator's confidence, his calm strength, that translated across species barriers. Getting her out required all 3 humans and 4 of the cubs working in coordination, using leverage and careful timing to move her massive bulk through the damaged corridors. The 2 smallest cubs, Nala and Sarabi, ranged ahead to check for obstacles and dangers. They found the 6th crew member deceased, killed instantly when the initial disaster had struck. Sarah took a moment to secure the body, ensuring it would be recovered for proper funeral rites. The cubs waited patiently, seeming to understand the solemnity of the moment. The 7th and final crew member was the ship's captain, a Zalari who had stayed at his post trying to send distress signals even as his life support failed. They found him still strapped into his command chair, unconscious but alive. Pipix, who had requested to join the rescue team after her experience with the cubs, was the one to carefully extract him. Sarabi stayed close to her, providing the emotional support that the small Zilari needed to function in such a terrifying environment. The trip back to the shuttle was even more dangerous than the trip in. The ship was now actively breaking apart, with hull breaches opening randomly as structural supports failed. The team moved as fast as they dared, with the cubs serving as mobile scouts and early warning systems. Twice, Apollo's warning growl gave them seconds to change course before a section they were about to enter explosively decompressed. When they finally reached the shuttle and sealed the airlock behind them, every human collapsed in exhaustion. The Cubs, their suits now powering down, immediately began checking on the rescued crew members, moving from one to another with concerned sniffs and gentle pawing. The rescued Valerian scientist had regained consciousness. She watched through blurry vision as Nala, the cub who had pulled her to safety, settled down next to her and began purring. The sound transmitted through their touching suits, a vibration that spoke of comfort and protection. Back on training station Epsilon 7, the docking bay was filled with medical teams, station personnel, and what seemed like half the cadets currently in training. When the shuttle's doors opened and the rescue team emerged, a cheer went up that could be heard throughout the station. The Cubs, now out of their suits, were surrounded by admiring cadets and officers. Even species that had been terrified of them 3 weeks ago pressed forward to touch them, to thank them, to acknowledge what they had done. Apollo, his mane now matted with sweat and showing the wear of their ordeal, sat in the middle of the chaos and roared. It wasn't the full power of an adult male lion, but it was getting close. The sound echoed through the docking bay, primal and powerful, announcing to anyone who would listen that they had hunted, they had succeeded, and they were very pleased with themselves. Then, as if the display of fierce pride had never happened, he spotted Sarah across the crowd and bounded toward her like an oversized, overgrown kitten. He nearly bowled her over in his enthusiasm. And when she sat down hard on the deck from his impact, he immediately climbed into her lap as if he still weighed 20 pounds instead of over 100. Ambassador Kelthris watched the scene with something approaching understanding. Around him, representatives from a dozen species were filming the moment, no doubt to send back to their homeworlds. The image of a human officer, exhausted from a successful rescue mission, laughing as a young apex predator tried to squeeze into her lap, despite having long since outgrown it, would spread across the galaxy. "I think I'm beginning to understand," he said to Commander Brelis, who had come down to the docking bay to greet the rescue team. "Understanding what?" she asked. "Why humans are so effective. Why they're going to be so important to the galactic community." He gestured to Sarah and the Cubs, now surrounded by rescued crew members who were thanking them with tears and gestures of gratitude. They don't see the universe as divided into threats and resources. They see potential. They see relationships. They make family out of predators, and friends out of strangers. Brelis made a clicking sound of agreement. "My species spent centuries trying to dominate nature. We bent it to our will through force and technology. Humans found another way. They partnered with nature, learned from it, grew with it. Look at those Cubs. They're warriors when they need to be. But they're also capable of gentleness and loyalty that puts most sentient species to shame." The Valerian scientist who had been rescued was approaching Sarah, supported by medical staff. She stopped in front of the human officer and tried to speak, but emotion choked off her words. Instead, she simply placed her hand on Nala's head, the cub who had saved her life. Nala looked up at her with those impossibly green eyes, and purred. "Thank you," the scientist finally managed to say. "I thought I was going to die alone in the dark. Then this beautiful creature came for me." Sarah smiled, tired but genuinely happy. "She's a good girl. They all are." They understood that today wasn't about fighting or competing. Today was about saving lives, about being heroes, and they were perfect. Later that evening, after medical checkups and debriefings and formal recognition ceremonies, Sarah found herself back in the recreation center. The Cubs were sprawled around her in various states of exhaustion. They had been bathed and fed and checked by veterinary staff, and now they were doing what Cubs everywhere did after a hard day's work, sleeping in a pile. Apollo had claimed his usual spot in her lap, though his growing size meant he was mostly on her lap with his back end hanging off and his head on her shoulder. Simba and Nala were curled together against her left side. Sarabi had stretched out across her feet. The other two females had found spots on the couch behind her. Marcus sat nearby, nursing a cup of coffee and sporting several new bruises from the rescue operation. "The station commander wants to formally recognize the Cubs," he said. "She's talking about special commendations, maybe even allowing them to be officially designated as station personnel." "They'd like that," Sarah murmured, her fingers automatically finding the spot behind Apollo's ear that made him sigh in his sleep. They're proud creatures. Recognition matters to them. The galactic community is going to change because of days like today, Marcus observed. Other species are going to start looking at animals differently. Not as resources or threats, but as partners. Maybe, Sarah agreed. Or maybe they'll just look at humans differently. Decide we're the weird ones who make friends with everything. Would that be so bad? She looked down at the pile of sleeping predators draped over and around her. Each one was a miracle of nature. A perfect hunter, honed by millions of years of evolution. Each one could kill without hesitation if they wanted to. And each one trusted her completely, loved her unreservedly, and would defend her to their last breath. No, she said softly, that wouldn't be bad at all. From across the recreation center, Voryx watched the scene with his Coraxian companions. 3 weeks ago, he had been terrified of these creatures. Now, he found himself feeling something he never expected. Respect, and perhaps even affection. Do you think, he asked his friends, that other humans would teach us how to do that? How to bond with creatures the way they do? Why would you want to? One of his companions asked. Voryx thought about Apollo's confident charge in the arena, about Nala's gentle retrieval of the injured Valerian, about Sarabi's comforting presence beside Pipix during the rescue. He thought about how the cubs could be fierce warriors one moment and affectionate companions the next, and how they seemed to know exactly which was needed. Because, he said slowly, maybe there's strength in gentleness. Maybe there's power in trust. The humans figured that out thousands of years ago. And look what they accomplished. They didn't conquer Earth by dominating everything. They thrived by making alliances with creatures that should have been their enemies. He watched as Sarah's head drooped, exhaustion finally claiming her. Apollo sensed it immediately and adjusted his position, becoming a warm, purring pillow for his human. The other cubs shifted as well, unconsciously arranging themselves to support her and keep her comfortable. They made family out of predators, Voryx continued. And those predators made them better, stronger, more complete. Maybe that's the lesson humans have for the galaxy. Maybe that's why they're going to change everything. In the months and years that followed, Training Station Epsilon 7 would become famous for its human-animal partnership program. The 6 lion cubs would grow into magnificent adult lions, serving as ambassadors, rescue specialists, and living proof that the line between predator and friend was one that could be crossed with understanding and love. Other humans would bring other animals to the station. Dogs that could detect chemical leaks, birds that could navigate through electromagnetic interference, even horses that could provide therapy for traumatized personnel. The galactic community would slowly, cautiously begin to explore their own relationships with the animals of their worlds, learning the lessons that humans had mastered long ago. But none of it would have been possible without that first demonstration, when 6 young lions defeated 43 trained cadets and then curled up in their human handler's lap, showing the galaxy that strength and gentleness were not opposites, but partners. Ambassador Kelthries would write in his report to the Valerian Council, "Humans do not see the universe as a hierarchy to be climbed or a competition to be won. They see it as a vast network of potential relationships. This perspective may be their greatest strength and their most valuable contribution to the galactic community. We would do well to learn from them." And in the recreation center of Training Station Epsilon 7, Sarah Chen slept peacefully, surrounded by her pride, her pack, her family. The predator cubs who had battled every cadet now stood guard over their sleeping human, loyal protectors and beloved companions. Proof that the human way of seeing the universe was spreading, one purr and one relationship at a time.